What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the College Football Show here on the Post-Gazette Sports YouTube channel. I'm Noah Hiles. He's Andrew Dustin. We're your college sports writers here at the Post-Gazette. And Andrew, we've got some stuff to talk about, I think, more about the team that I cover compared to you. The Penn State continues to move up in the rankings. What are they now, in the top 10? No game this week. Pitt, on the other hand, little bit of a different circumstance in every way, shape, or form. You actually had a chance to watch Pitt for the first time. Would love to hear your thoughts on how that went, and maybe you can ask me some questions on anything that you saw and didn't understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start off. First and foremost, Penn State played Northwestern as a big favorite and kind of tight-roped out of that one with some crazy weather, 10-point win. But with it ending at the time it did, was able to get back and watch a little bit of Pitt, Georgia Tech. And I know last week we were talking about it. Both teams were big favorites coming into it. We were talking college football playoff hype about which team had an easier path. And no, it feels like after Saturday for Pitt, those conversations might need to stop. Uh, what exactly went wrong in the Georgia Tech game? Because that was a first game for a new head coach, program in turmoil, new HC. Didn't look good for the Panthers there.
Yeah, the way they played on Saturday, they might be a bubble team for the D3 playoff. Them and W and J might be fighting for position there to go get blown out by my alma mater in week 1. No, but in all seriousness, I was telling you before we started recording, and I think I said this in our mailbag, you look at other losses where Pitt, quote unquote, pitted. And sometimes it's just an inferior opponent raising their level of play, where you get a crazy effort from an individual or just one side of the ball or a collective effort as a team. This was not the case on Saturday. Georgia Tech did not play a good football game. They only threw for like 105 yards. They ran for a lot on the ground, but most of those came on like 2 or 3 breakouts late in the fourth quarter for most of the game. And I know this because I had to write my game story as the game's unfolding. I was going to highlight how Pitt's defense held Georgia Tech to under 200 yards of offense. That obviously changed in the final couple of minutes on some long drives. But they did not play well. But the thing was, Pitt played worse. It was probably one of the worst offensive performances I've seen as someone who's watched Pitt football for a very long time. And that's saying something, and it's really saying something with the players they have on this team. And it's not like this is a team, that has the quarterback that they used to have, a decade ago or so, or, they have experience all over the ball, and this offense has shown its ability to move the football against much better opponents like Tennessee, who's another top 10 program right now. They just laid an egg in all areas offensively. Defensively, I still think that, excluding the final 5 minutes where they were just worn out because of all of the offensive mistakes, they played a very solid football game. They got to the quarterback well. They stopped the pass for all 4 quarters. It's just they ran out of gas because of the 3 turnovers in the second half, because of the 3 and outs to start in the first half, and everything in between. It just looks like this offense has absolutely no confidence in itself whatsoever. And, it's easy to say, oh, they missed Kenny Pickett. Like, what team wouldn't miss a Heisman finalist that's now starting in the NFL? What team wouldn't? But the thing that Pitt really showed it's missing in this loss against Georgia Tech is the moxie, the swagger, the confidence that came with number 8 when he was on the field. We saw it on Sunday when he took a hit from a Jets player and he got up smiling and talking his trash. And there's just none of that confidence, none of that swagger on this Pitt offense right now. You don't have a guy that all the 10 other players on the field can look at and say, things aren't going great, but he's going to bail us out. He's going to figure it out. Slovis doubted himself a lot Saturday, and it led to some mistakes. And when other players weren't able to elevate their game, when they lose Israel Abanikanda to an injury, and you have Vincent Davis coming in and fumbling the ball twice, when you have numerous receivers dropping balls on 3rd down that create 3 and outs, it was just a catastrophe of errors, a parade of mistakes, if you will. And it just got to be too much to overcome. It was very, very ugly.
Yeah, and you talk about those mistakes, and it just feels like And, a good consolation prize, at least if I'm looking at the facts, objectively speaking, yeah, losing Kenny Pickett is rough for a program. No program wants to move on. But you're thinking Keaton Slovis coming in. This is a guy
Right.
who did great for a number of times at USC, was a Pac-12 award winner with Offensive Player of the Years and things like that, Freshman of the Year, stood out. And you're thinking, this is the guy who's going to, pick up right where Pickett left off and keep the train rolling. And the first couple of games, it felt like you saw elements of that, but then it happens again, right? It's from the outside looking in, it feels like every year there's at least one goose egg from Pat Narduzzi's team, and it felt like this year was the one. In Game 5 or Game 4, it's I don't know. I guess I'll ask it to you. Why do you think this happens seemingly year after year? That no matter how talented Pitt is, they drop a game like this. That's kind of inexcusable.
I'll just say this. It goes way back before Narduzzi. I'm not defending Narduzzi. This is his
Sure.
fourth loss at home as a double-digit favorite. And it's by far the biggest loss in point spread margin, as I've written and said numerous times. But I mean, this happened under Wannstedt. It happened under Walt Harris. It happened under Todd Graham. However, the 3 seconds he was here. It happened under Paul Christ. I mean, it's happened for everyone. The term is pitting, and this was the epitome of pitting, Andrew. I can't explain why it happens. I don't know why it rains. I don't know why the sun shines. I don't know why anything happens. Some things just happen. Science can actually explain some of those other things, but I'm a sports writer, not a scientist. Nonetheless, I get back to my point. I don't know how this continues to happen. Maybe it's just a culture thing where when you're playing in front of, an empty stadium and you feel like you're just kind of in the middle when you're not an elite program with all these high expectations. Trap games happen, but at the same time, this was a program that I, at least in the beginning of the year, believed that this stuff was done with. This in the middle, being ranked is the pinnacle. I thought that those days were over. At least that's what 2021 made a lot of people believe was, okay, well, they have a bulk load of experience and talent in a lot of key position groups. And the ones where they are a little bit young at, they should be able to overcome thanks to acquisitions through the transfer portal. And you mentioned a guy like Slovis. He comes in and there's no reason why he shouldn't have been able to pick up, maybe not be as good as Kenny Pickett, but with the offense designed the way it was to run the ball and based off its strengths, the running backs have performed well. Excluding Vincent Davis's 2 fumbles, they've had a really great effort from every running back, or from at least one running back in every game this year. The offensive line has got better and better each week, and I would include this last week as an improvement. They protected Slovis. They gave running lanes to the running backs. It's just they didn't hang on to the football. It's the quarterback play has really held them back, and the receiver play. You would have thought that, Slovis would have been good enough where he kind of would have made up for that, but it's just so far, he's really held them back. And it's tough to say otherwise. I still do believe he's by far the most talented quarterback on the roster because you see it in flashes. You see it in that final drive of the first half, how easy that looked. That's the offense that should be showing up against Georgia Tech. You see it, I guess we've pointed to it a million times. The first half against Tennessee, the final full-length drive against West Virginia, where they needed a score to tie it. He was converting on third down. And I guess that's probably the most jarring thing from Saturday offensively out of everything was normally this team has been pretty good on third down. Even against Tennessee, they found a way to move the sticks. But it showed when they needed to pass on third down, their lack of chemistry through the air, and that might be because Keaton missed some time with injury. It might be because of the conservative play calling against Rhode Island, where they really didn't force anything or try to do anything that wasn't perfectly there in front of him. You couldn't rely on it. They got to situations where it said, look, we need you to complete a ball for 5 yards or we're going to go 3 and out. And it just continued to be unsuccessful. And that's why they pitted this time. I can't speak for all the other times in the past because A, my brain's not capable of recalling every single one of them because there's so many and I'm just a man, Andrew. Right. And B, it's just, it's different groups, but I can speak for this group because this is the team I covered and it was inexcusable, but there's a direct cause. It's the inability to do something different on offense that really led to this epic loss.
Yeah, no, you put it bluntly. pitting. That's the best way to put it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's felt like he was just another one of those. And this one caught me off guard, but maybe at this point it shouldn't. Who knows? But
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. We'll see moving forward. I mean, the crazy part is, I mean, if you look, the Coastal Division in the ACC is bad. It just is. There's one ranked team in it right now, and it's Syracuse. No one's taking that seriously. I don't care. Sure, they're undefeated right now, and you got to put them in the top 25. But Pitt, I think Pitt should be able to beat Syracuse. There's not one team on Pitt's schedule who they shouldn't be able to beat based off of the talent that, this isn't speculation. You saw the team, these same guys play well last season and play well in certain games this year. It's just, what are they going to do each week is now up for guessing, because after a loss like this, you just think, what even is this football team that I cover? Who knows? But I actually want to ask some questions about the team they are playing this upcoming week, Virginia Tech. Normally, Virginia Tech's a name that you read on your schedule and you think that's exciting. That's a notable program, especially when you're going there. You got the Enter Sandman. They've been, a staple to the ACC ever since they left the Big East for it, over 20 years ago, I feel like now. Mm-hmm. But it hasn't been the same old Virginia Tech this season. It started bad. They looked bad last week against North Carolina. And maybe it is a chance for Pitt to recover. They have a first-year head coach who you're very familiar with, Brent Pry, Penn State guy, been there for a while. What can you tell me and all of the Pitt fans listening in about Virginia Tech's head coach?
Well, for Brent Pry, the first thing I'll start off with is highly successful as a defensive coordinator for 6 years at Penn State, but he has inherited quite an obstacle at Virginia Tech. The post-Frank Beamer era, Justin Fuente was brought in to supposedly put the program in the right direction, did not succeed at that, and now you turn it over to Pry, and the early goings have not really been impressive. But that's not any indication on Pry's quality as a coach. He's a guy who's got a lot of experience and comes from a pretty good coaching tree, too. I mean, his dad was an offensive coordinator at East Stroudsburg and actually was James Franklin's OC when Franklin was a quarterback, if you go way back to yesteryear. But the tree, I mean, it seems like Pry is going to be able to right this, but the last couple of weeks, for a guy who's an offensive-minded coach, the defense has not exactly showed up for Virginia Tech. They gave up 33 points in a blowout at home to West Virginia, gave up 41 points to North Carolina, and we know that North Carolina defense under Mac Brown, not exactly the best. They gave up a bunch of points to App State in the opener. Yeah. Virginia Tech got 10 against North Carolina. So tells you what you need to know about the Virginia Tech program as of recently. And in the opener, when Brent Pry started off as a head coach, he lost at Old Dominion to his former co-assistant or former positional coach, the offensive coordinator at Penn State, Ricky Ronnie, is the head coach at Old Dominion. So Pry leaves Penn State, loses to a guy he used to share the staff with. Now he's at Virginia Tech. It's still year one. You can't judge a guy based off his first head coaching experience, but the early indications are the defensive-minded coach. He likes to be aggressive and blitz a lot, and right now that's left his defensive backfield out to dry. And 74 combined points given up the last 2 weeks spells like a recipe for disaster for what looks like, knock on wood, some better weather in Pittsburgh this weekend if Pitt does elect to air the ball out. But who knows? That's always the debate, right? Will the Panthers throw it a bunch, or are they going to elect to keep running it? But Pry, as a DC, was very successful at Penn State for 6 years, took over for Bob Shoop, who ended up going over to Tennessee after a couple of years with Penn State, and it's Pry's first head coaching experience. So still working out the kinks, definitely getting adjusted to it, but the early returns have been far from optimal so far for the Hokies.
And that's kind of what I was going to follow up with, where you mentioned a defensive-minded head coach. Pitt obviously has one of those as well, a guy who's a defensive coordinator, and his defense reflects the strategy in which he used to call a defense when he was a DC, with Narduzzi, with that pressure, with that cover one, cover zero, getting to the quarterback. Is that what the Pitt offense is going to get a look at Saturday against Virginia Tech?
Yeah, it's not going to be as crazy, hectic blitzes as what Penn State does now with Manny Diaz, former Miami head coach, because he's putting 7 DBs on the field, blitzing 3 of them, dropping 4 back in coverage. Pry's a little bit more traditional, but he loves to send the linebackers. And it makes sense. Linebacking's his background. That's the positional coach he loved working with when he was at Penn State. So expect a lot of dogs blitzes on that regard. Guys from the weak side, from the strong side, tons of linebackers will be coming constantly. But in terms of the corner blitzes, safeties, not so much. He kind of trusts his coverage and relies on those guys to sit back, play a lot of cover 2. It's not going to be as much cover 0 as a Pat Narduzzi where he says, hey, I trust my DBs to go one-on-one and beat me over the top. Try it. Pry's a little bit more conservative than that, but he likes to send his linebackers. It's not going to be a 4-man rush every play by any stretch.
You mentioned that Pry is a first-year head coach. Pitt lost to a first-time head coach on Saturday as Georgia Tech fired their head coach on Monday. Its head coach on Monday, along with the athletic director. And the trend continues here in college football, Andrew. Just looking around, ironically enough, a lot of them have connections to Pittsburgh one way or another as well. There are 5 Power 5 coaches have already been canned, and we're in the first week of October. I'm going to go through the list right now. 1, Scott Frost from Nebraska, the Pitt connection there. Offensive coordinator Mark Whipple leaves Pitt to go to Nebraska. He coaches 3 games with the guy who hired him. And now, who knows what's going to happen over at that program. Herm Edwards, no Pitt connection, I don't think there, but nonetheless, he gets fired from Arizona State in the non-conference slate of his schedule. Jeff Collins from Georgia Tech fired in the game after he gets fired. Georgia Tech beats Pitt. And then Durrell from Colorado loses his job this weekend, as does Paul Chryst, the former Pitt Panthers head coach. He's replaced by Jim Leonard at the helm for the Badgers. And so, coaching changes are nothing new to the sport of football, but normally we're seeing 5 guys in a span of 3 weeks get fired much later in the regular season, if at all in the regular season. Andrew, why do you think we're seeing this wave of head coaches, being handed walking papers well before the meat of their conference schedule even gets underway?
Yeah, it's crazy. It feels like the days of Black Monday don't even exist anymore, whether it's the NFL or whether it's college football. It's always, the Monday after your last game of the year or penultimate game, you'd see the coaches get canned. I think a really good point to be made, and specifically the example I'll talk about is Wisconsin. Jim Leonard, the defensive coordinator, gets promoted in place of Chryst. And there was a lot of fear in Wisconsin because the defense has been pretty good for the most part over the years under Chryst. The fear was that Leonard would leave if he's not promoted to become the head coach there. And so Wisconsin's athletic department said, well, Chryst, you've took us to Big Ten championship games. You've won over 60 games, really a winning coach. That's not good enough. Be like Leonard. We don't want to lose him, and we're going to elevate you. And I think the point there is that I think if you're a program that thinks highly of a guy who's on your staff, but you have your doubts, you're not ready to say, okay, we're going to give you the keys to the program, sign you to a multi-year deal with buyouts and all that sort of jazz. And if you fail after 3 years, we can you and we eat a few $1 million. I think these colleges, and I think it's kind of a smart strategy, as they're saying, we like a guy within the program, not the head coach, obviously. Example A, Carl Durrell, that did not work at Colorado.
No,
but maybe they like somebody within the program and they say, hey, let's elevate him. He's done a really good job with recruiting. The players like him. In the case of Leonard, very well-respected defensive mind. So they say, let's elevate him early in the season rather than late, because it's really hard to judge a man's ability to coach if you only give him 2 games, right? 3 games, maybe a bowl game, whatever it usually is. I think teams are finally catching on that that's not enough time. You can't really judge a guy. And if you already know, hey, this HC, he's a lame duck. This isn't going anywhere. Wisconsin, they were 2-2. They had just gotten the socks blown off by Illinois. And, of course, it was their former head coach and Brett Bielema who left them for Arkansas, who's now back at Illinois. There's got to be nothing more sour if you're a Badgers fan than losing to that guy. But I think it just goes to the point of you're trying out somebody and give them a longer tryout date. Why not? You don't really have anything to lose if you think your season is totally lost. Now, in the case of Nebraska, that one I could go on for forever about. Why was he even there?
Yeah. To build upon your point, we spoke with Charlie Partridge, who is the defensive line coach for Pitt, and he's, I think, the assistant head coach as well as his title. He's a former head coach. He coached at FAU for a couple of seasons. We asked him about what he thinks, what he makes of all these, early season firings for head coaches, if it's discouraging for him and why this is happening. And he kind of hit on the reasons where you're talking about, but primarily he talked about recruiting and how, if you're a program like Wisconsin and you have guys that you like, that are recruiting and you want to make a move away from Christ, you can promote someone from within early, and it still gives you a shot to continue pursuing these guys. Like, hey, look, our DC's still here. He's going to be around. That guy who's still making phone calls to you, he's not going anywhere. We can still land you. If you have a guy like that, you can do that, and you can make that move and move onward and still have the success in recruiting. And even if it's not going to be, if it's a Nebraska type situation or an Arizona State or Colorado type situation where you're going to go external hire, you got to look at the reality with the portal now, with the way recruiting works, with early signing days and everything that goes along with the modern college football game. There's going to be so much roster turnover. The earlier you can start preparing for that, the better. The earlier you can start looking at the guys on Arizona State, the guys on Georgia Tech, the guys on Wisconsin, Nebraska, whoever, of, all right, our guys are going to leave, but can we potentially swap? And kind of like what Pitt did with Addison going to Pitt and Slovis coming to USC. When there's coaching changes, there wasn't a coaching change at Pitt, obviously, but when there's a coaching change at USC, some players are going to come in, some players are going to come out. You have your eyes open to those things. And the earlier you can start that process of looking at guys, you can't break the rules and reach out. That certainly doesn't happen. Teams going and trying to find a talented player somewhere else and recruiting them, even though their name's not in the transfer portal. I can't think of one instance where that has ever happened.
No.
But you can keep an eye. You can really start the roster overhaul. And even if you don't know who your head coach is, you can at least put together some sort of strategy where on your list of candidates, all right, this guy likes to coach this way. If you're hiring someone like a Narduzzi, well, we need to go find pass rushers. We need to go find athletic middle linebackers or defensive backs who can hold their own on man coverage. That's got to be our recruitment strategy. Things like that. And I think that waiting until January to make that decision, you basically are throwing 3-4 months worth of work in the trash for nothing. And you have to start all over. So I think that's what Charlie Partridge talked about, where it just moves so quickly now. You don't have time to waste, and you got to get moving quickly if you want to avoid something like what might be going on at Nebraska, where it's going to take 3-4 years to really dig themselves out of this hole that Scott Frost has put them in. And, no program wants to get into that. So when it's just not that time, some programs have found that the best option is to just find that one booster who will write that one check and start over from scratch as early as possible. It's almost like, imagine if pro teams had that option where they could just start the draft process in week 3, you really don't have that. You still, granted, they still have to play the games as well, but they can pretty much put all of their priority toward, playing guys that they know aren't going to transfer out and finding guys who will be around whenever the new coach is decided. So I think that's what Charlie talked to us about, and I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, totally agreed. I mean, you hit it on the head. It's not just recruiting guys anymore. It's the transfer portal has changed so much about college football, and the reality is, if you're not stable as a program or you don't have your guy lined up, why are you more appealing to a transfer? Why would you want to leave your current program to go, I'm going to go to that one that's in a little bit of turmoil? There's no reason to believe that that's a better landing spot for you. I think it's a great point. And it's the landscape of college football where you have early signing days and you have people that are graduating from high school early. And, it seems like recruiting is 365 days a year. It's no secret. I mean, this stuff is happening every single day. There's conversations going on. So anything you can do to put yourself in a better position and inspire confidence in your recruits. Because the reality is, if you're just saying, hey, we're rolling out the same thing, wink, wink, this guy's going to be gone by December, but stay with us. We want you to come to our program. Yeah. What 18, 19-year-old kid is going to say, yeah, that's where I want to go the next 4 years? Why?
What person would sign up to work at a job where the boss is going to get fired a month into you going there? You don't ever want to put yourself in that situation. So I think it does make sense. It's a harsh reality for coaches, obviously. Yeah. I mean, that's scary, where if it doesn't work out early on, you could see the door. However, I mean, there are benefits to it as well. If you're on a team, if you're leading a program that is consistent and you have some job security, there are players to be gained from this. It's just a whole new world. And when they implemented the portal, you also have to take into account everyone has the COVID year pretty much still. So there are these guys with an extra year of eligibility. There's just so much new. There's so many new elements to all of this. The rest of the game has to adjust, and that includes, coaching transactions. So it's definitely something interesting to follow. Don't think we'll have to be covering any coaching hirings or firings or anything. I don't think with
so.
James Franklin's status and Narduzzi's recent extension, I don't think we'll have to deal with any of that. But who knows? I would have thought Pitt would have beat a 22-point favorite Saturday, but that didn't happen either. It's just chaos every Saturday in this sport we cover. Andrew, any final words?
Just to say that, 22-point favorite. Penn State was about a 28-point favorite, so neither team covered. So if there's any consolation to that, if you're a Pitt fan, Penn State didn't either. So neither team performed that well. Penn State got the win, though.
That'll make Pitt fans feel a lot better about what happened Saturday. Well, Penn State didn't cover. That's what you should say to them to make them feel better. Be sure to follow us on social media on all of our platforms. Read everything that we write. We put a lot of work into it at post-gazette.com, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got more content coming out week by week, and we appreciate your support as always. We'll see you next week. Pitt has a game. Penn State doesn't, but they have a fun one coming up next weekend, and we'll be there to talk about that and more.